time to shake the dust off and begin.
Hey everybody, welcome to Shift Your Story. It's your host, Lucy Price. Let's get started. Welcome back to Shift Your Story. Hi everybody. Today we are talking about how to apologize. And what if you're not sorry? As I was prepping for this podcast episode and doing my notes and everything, I kept having Beyonce's song Sorry come into my head. The one that goes, sorry, I ain't sorry, sorry, I ain't sorry. And so I don't know, I just feel like in a silly, playful mood. But in all seriousness, I think that in our culture, we see a lot of people apologizing for things that they don't need to apologize for. And on the flip side of that, there's a lot of things that we don't apologize for, either because it's uncomfortable, or we don't really know what to say, or we don't really know how to go about it, or we feel like actions matter more than words, and so on and so forth. And so I really wanted to talk about how to make a really solid, effective apology, and then what to actually do if you don't feel sorry, if you don't feel like it's a situation where you have to apologize for either your actions or what you said or how you showed up or anything like that. So that is our topic of the day. And as we go throughout this podcast episode, if you have any questions or if you're struggling with something that's going on in your own life, like you're in a conflict right now and you're not really sure about how to apologize, if you should apologize, if you should expect an apology, then I would invite you to definitely leave a comment. They might show up as a review on the podcast episode, but if you leave a comment as a question, I will answer said question. I would really love to start doing like a little bit of Q&A on the podcast, because I'm someone who really enjoys answering questions and giving value. So if you ever have a question around anything, please send me a DM or let me know in the review comments section of whatever podcast episode you listen to. But let's just go ahead and get started. I think that when we're growing up, when we're really looking at making apologies as children, oftentimes we're like made to say sorry, right? We might not actually feel sorry. We might not actually want to apologize, but a parent or teacher or guardian of some kind said that we had to apologize, and so we did. So we haven't exactly had the experience as children of really understanding why apologies matter or how to craft an apology. It's almost like you're just meant to say sorry and then move on. And that's not really how it works as adults in adult relationships. You can't just say sorry, or if you don't mean what you say, it doesn't really land. It doesn't land effectively. To really simplify an effective apology, I think it can be broken down into two parts. The first part is to really acknowledge the pain, really acknowledge the mistakes made, and to validate the other person's feeling and experience, the person who you're making an apology to. And then the second part of it is to express what will change, express what you will do differently, and follow through with those things. So with all that being said, let's get into the 5 steps of making an effective apology. I think that the key to a good apology is by making it personal, by making it really personal to the person or the situation, and specific to the feelings, specific to the actions, specific to the behavior, specific to the things that you're remorseful for. And by making it personal and specific, it is more intentional. It's not just this general, I'm sorry. It's, I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry for hurting you in this way. I'm sorry for showing up in this way. I'm sorry that this thing happened. The more specific, the more personal you can get with an apology, the more I think it feels personal. It feels intentional to the person receiving it. So the very first step I have for you here in creating and crafting an effective apology that lands is to make it personal and specific. The second step is to acknowledge your mistake. Take responsibility. Clearly acknowledge what you did wrong, what you would want to do differently, the pain you caused, the actions you took, and be specific. I think when we get vague of like, I'm sorry for hurting you, it can almost land of like, okay, but do you know what hurt? You know, like it can almost start diving a little bit deep into, do you know what I'm actually upset about? Or do you know what actually caused pain? And yes, it is a dialogue, you know, a conversation around the pain caused, but I think part of what makes an apology effective is to like really be specific about what you're owning up to, what part you're trying to clean up, and really being aware, showing that you're aware of what hurt and what caused pain. And so I think the more specific you can get and the less general, it's really helpful, as well as really acknowledging and taking responsibility for your part in it. It's cleaning up your side of the street, your end of the table. Step 3 is putting yourself in their shoes. Show genuine remorse for the pain and the hurt that they've experienced. Try and understand things from their point of view. If you were them, how do you think you would feel? Would you see how different actions, different behaviors, or different words may have affected you in that moment? And you can use this like as an example of how this can come into play in an apology is I can imagine how you must have felt when X, Y, or Z thing happened. When I said this thing that hurt you, when I did this thing that went against an agreement we shared, when I crossed your boundary in this way. But putting yourself in their shoes, in their point of view, I think helps to make for an effective apology. Step 4 is to apologize without conditions, without excuses. Focus on what you're actually sorry for. Focus on your actions. Focus on the part that you had to play, almost regardless of their feelings. Not that their feelings don't matter. Their feelings absolutely matters. That's like such a big bulk of making an effective apology is validating and recognizing someone else's feelings. But what would you be sorry for? What would you apologize for? Even like regardless of their point of view, like what do you feel regretful about because you just feel regretful about it? What do you feel sorry for just because you would have wanted to do something differently? You would have just wanted to show up differently and behave in a different way because it matters to you, because it matters to who you are as a person and you living in accordance of your values and your alignment. So apologize for those things without making excuses, without conditions, without them needing to apologize to you, without having to explain why you shouldn't have to be sorry or why it shouldn't have hurt them due to X, Y, and Z. But I also want to like bring in here that there is a difference between excuses and an explanation. Excuses tend to be defensive. Explanations are about allowing the other person an opportunity to understand your perspective, not necessarily to justify your actions, but just to have more information and more context for why you may have shown up in the way that you did. The 5th step is the follow through. It is actually taking the steps that you say you're going to take. It is taking the steps to improve the situation, to avoid a similar situation from happening in the future. It is learning from your mistake. It's changing your behavior. Now, could you do all of these things, really craft an effective, meaningful, beautiful apology, and the other person still might not accept that apology? Yes, that can happen. You could craft the most beautiful, effective apology in the world, and it might not be accepted by the other person. And I want to tell you why that is. The other person, in order for an apology to be accepted, has to be open and receptive to receiving and accepting that apology, which may or may not happen based off what they have going on in their heads or in their lives or in their heart, or based off of what actually transpired in the breaking of trust or in the crossing of a boundary or in the conflict. But the point of an apology is, yes, to rebuild, but I also think like the point of the apology is to show what you're sorry for and to take ownership, to take responsibility, and to share and demonstrate what you're going to do differently. To share that it matters, to share that the conflict, the transgression, the hurt feelings, to share that it matters and that you are showing up and available to do the repair work in the relationship. That you are showing up and you're ready to move forward, and that you want the other person to be aware that you know what you did. But if you're apologizing just because you feel like you should or you feel like you have to, I think that's when the apologies don't really land. So what do you do if you aren't actually sorry? If you don't actually feel like you have anything to apologize for, or if you actually feel that you showed up in integrity with who you are and your values as a person. First, I want to invite you to investigate that feeling, to investigate that mindset. Now, you may not actually be the one in the quote unquote wrong here, and you might not actually quote unquote owe an apology. But I think it's important to really be aware and recognize where that's coming from. Is that coming from you feeling really grounded in your choices, really grounded in your actions, really grounded in your values and what you said and the steps you took and your actions? Or is this a knee-jerk defensive reaction? Is this discomfort? Is this feeling bad and you're trying to get out of feeling bad by putting it on the other person? Just really taking that time to be honest with yourself, to be real with yourself of where is this coming from? Is this coming from you having to like push away feelings that don't feel very good? Have you actually taken the time to see things from their point of view? Or are you doubling down on your own opinion, on your own actions due to not wanting to look a certain way or come off a certain way or appear a certain way or feel a certain way? So the first thing I would invite you to do is really investigate, why aren't you sorry? And if it feels grounded, then proceed to the next steps. And if it doesn't feel grounded, if it feels like a knee-jerk reaction, sit with that. Contemplate that, get curious about that, and then decide if you're going to make an apology based off of what comes through in that contemplation. So step one, if you're not actually sorry, I think you can still express understanding. You can still express an understanding of how the other person is feeling and validating those emotions. You can let them know that you are aware of the hurt that they're feeling and you're aware of how your actions have impacted them and their response to those actions. I think even expressing, and if you can bring yourself to validate the emotions, I think that's so powerful, even if you don't feel that there's something for you to apologize for. And if you're not going to make a full apology, I think expressing understanding, expressing that you see the other person, that you hear the other person, and you understand the other person can go a really long way. The second thing I'll say here is share your perspective without being defensive. Explain why you made the choices that you made, why you behaved in a certain way, why you said a certain thing, without being defensive, without being combative, but just really truly sharing your perspective. This is quite similar in the actual apology sequences that we just went through. This is pretty similar in the way of don't make excuses, but it's okay to give an explanation. I would say if you feel like you want to share your perspective and give an explanation for why you showed up in a certain way, that can actually be really helpful. And I think that being able to do this in a way that feels not combative, it comes down to the energy you bring into the room. It comes into your tone of voice and the words you use to describe your perspective and your situation and why you showed up in the way that you showed up. Lastly, I would encourage you to focus on what you both need to move forward and what steps that you both can take in relationship to move forward from this conflict or this mismatch. This, I don't want to give an apology, but I also want to move forward and I don't want this to be an ending of our relationship. So share what steps you are wanting and willing to take, how you can rebuild, what repair work you are willing to show up and do within the relationship. Talk about how the two of you can prevent a misunderstanding or a mistake or a tension or a conflict from happening in the future. What you can do differently, how you both can show up differently so that these hurt feelings or these frustrations don't occur again or are less likely to occur again. I think by taking the time to really understand the person and where they're coming from, as well as share your perspective in a kind, compassionate way, can help you to land into the area of agreeing to disagree. And you can agree to disagree and still move forward in a relationship and still have a beautiful, loving, fulfilling relationship with somebody. There are going to be moments in life where we don't feel like we have things to apologize for. And I've seen, and in my own life, I know that has been, I don't want to say a deal breaker, but it's like interrupted the relationship in some kind of way. The way that I personally choose to look at it, though, is that it might be a mismatch of values and it might be a mismatch of compatibility. And maybe we just aren't compatible in that particular area of our relationship or in our particular values or perspectives or standpoints. And I think that if you can show up in kindness and compassion, you can get into the area of agreeing to disagree, or just at least finding a little bit more peace, a little bit more harmony in the relationship again. But I will say, like, leading with kindness and compassion, leading with a desire to understand, I think is so effective if you don't feel like there's something to apologize for. All right, everybody. Let me know if you have any questions. And also, what served you? What in this are you taking away in this particular episode that you can apply to your own life? Really take a moment to think about it. And if you want to do the extra credit, write that comment, because what happens when we write things down, when we really start to think about it, think about how we can apply things in our life, is that we integrate the information in a different way. It doesn't just come in one ear and go out the other. We can actually see how we can use it to really help us and help our lives and help our relationships improve, and how we can like see the changes and see the results that we want to see. So definitely let me know what you're taking away and how you're applying this to your life. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next podcast episode. Take care, everybody. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If something resonated with you in today's episode, if you could leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps other people learn what we're all about here at Shift Your Story, and it helps this podcast reach listeners who may need to hear what it is that we have to say. If you would like to connect with me or work with me, you can visit my website at www.shiftyourstory.net. You can also find all of my socials on there so you can connect with me in the way that works best for you. I'll see you next time.